Let me give you a quick tour of the RS line indicator that we're going to build. Here it is laid out on a daily chart. It's this blue line. Over on the right, this is a new high indicator, and you may be asking yourself, it certainly doesn't look like a new high compared to this area or this area. And I'll get into the details of why it is that the current day is highlighted and how you can customize that value. If we go into the settings, you'll see there's a number of different things we can configure. You can change the index. By definition, an RS line uses the S&P 500. If you have a different index, you can configure that here. You can change the color based on the direction. So currently, when you tick this box, when the RS line is going up, it's green. When it's going down, it's red. You can change those colors. For example, maybe like it blue on the way up, orange on the way down. You can change the width of the line. You can also update the vertical offset. So this moves it up and down in the chart. This is generally a value when you change the index, as some indexes will scale the chart differently. And this allows you a custom configuration based on your needs. And the last thing is the look back count. So the way that this works is it's currently set to 50 bars. So from this current day, it looks back 50 bars to see if the current value is higher than any value over that 50 bar range. And in this case, it is. If you extend that out to 70 days, you'll see that the current bar is not the highest. And the same goes for here. So depending on your trading style and what exactly you're looking to do, you may want to extend this to a higher number or decrease it to a lower number. So if I make it 100, you'll see that it no longer highlights this value as a new high. And with that, let's get started. We're going to create a few different versions of the RS line indicator, working out from some very basic code into the code that creates the RS line that I showed in the previous section. So to get started, we just go down to the bottom and click on the Pine editor. Inside of here, I've already put in the code for our first version. It's pretty basic stuff. What we're going to do is specify version 4, which is the latest version of Pine. We're going to create a study, which is an indicator. We give it a title called RS line. And the overlay parameter specifies whether we want this indicator to overlay the existing chart or be shown in a pane below it. And we're going to start by showing in a pane below. On line 7, what we're doing is we're using a function called input. And what input does is anything that you put in here is going to be shown inside of the settings dialog. So we're going to create an input called index. The type is a symbol. Other types of input values might be a Boolean or an integer. You can have a color. In our case, we need to let the input know it's referencing a symbol, and the default value is SPX, which is the symbol for the S&P 500 inside of TradingView. The next thing we need to do is get information about the S&P 500 so we can compare it to the current stock, and we do that with the security function. We're going to specify the parameter of the index, so that references S&P 500. We're going to request that information on a daily basis, so we specify D, and we're going to use the close. You could use other values such as the high or the low of the day. The RS line is as simple as the ratio of the close of the current bar for the stock that we're looking at divided by the SPX. In this case, this variable here, which is the S&P 500, and we multiply that times 100. The last thing we do is we're going to plot that value. So we plot the ratio that we just calculated. We want the color of that plot to be blue, and we want the line width to be 1. So we're going to save this over here, and we're going to add it to our chart. We're going to minimize the Pine editor, and now you can see here's the RS line in a new pane below the current chart. One of the nice things that we can do once we've created this RS line in a pane below is now we can overlay our index directly on top of here. So let me show how you to do that. If you go up here to the compare, and we're going to type in SPX, and once the symbol, so this is the S&P 500 overlaid on top of the chart. If I just click on that, and I say move to existing pane below, now you'll see here's the S&P 500 overlaid on the same chart as our RS line. So this can be helpful because it's you can look for various trends. So for example, we can see here, this particular stock was trending up, while at the same time, the S&P 500 was pretty flat. So that's a nice thing you can do when you have the content in a separate pane. So that's step 1. For our second version of the indicator, we're going to add the code to create the offset that I mentioned before, the vertical offset. So we're going to start by closing these indicators that we have in front of us. We're going to go back into the Pine editor. I'm going to mark all this text and delete it and paste in our next version. So here's what's different. You'll notice here that we now are specifying an overlay of true. So this indicator is going to be overlaid on top of the current chart. The index value we had from before, and now we're going to add another input to the settings called the offset. So this is the vertical offset information that we're looking for. This is going to be an integer. We're going to specify the default value for this offset to be 25. The minimum value the user can enter is 1. The maximum value is 500. And we increment in steps of 1. So whenever they click the up arrow or the down arrow, it will increment 1 in either direction. We're also going to specify the width of the line that we want to display. So we're going to have another input called line width. This is an integer. The default value is 1. The minimum is 1 and the maximum is 5. These two lines with SPX and the ratio are the same. And the only other change is that we're going to now update our plot. So we're going to say the ratio that we calculated, we're going to multiply it times the offset that the user requested. The color is still going to be blue, but we're going to change the line width to equal whatever it was that the user specified. So we're going to save this and add it to the chart. And I'm going to minimize. And there's our RS line overlaid on top of the existing chart. If we go into the settings, you'll see here's our index. We can adjust the vertical offset to move it up and down in the chart. And we can also specify the line width. Version of the RS line indicator, what we're going to do is add support for changing of the lines going up versus going down. So changing the line based on the direction. The way that we're going to do that is go into the Pine editor. I'm going to delete the code from the previous version, paste in a new version of the code, and I'll walk you through the changes. The first thing that's different here is on line number 5. We're creating a variable called previous ratio, and this is used to save the value of the current ratio so that when we get to the next bar, we can look and make the decision, is the current bar up or down from the previous bar? These three values right here, 10, 11, and 12, these are all the same as in the previous version, but we're going to add 3 more inputs. We're going to create an input called color based on direction. You'll see that this is a Boolean value, so the user either wants it on or they want it off. We're going to default to having it false. We're going to create a color up option, and we're going to give it a type of color, so the user can choose the color that they prefer. The default value is green, and the same with color down. So the text is down, it's a type color, and the default value is red. The SPX and the ratio is still the same. And then here's the logic that we use to determine what color line to show. So the current line color we're going to default to is blue. We're going to have an if statement, and it's going to say if change color. So if the user requested that the color change based on whether the bar is up or down, and if the ratio that we just calculated is greater than the previous ratio. So if the bar is of the current bar is greater than the previous bar, then we want the color to be the value of color up. The opposite is true if the ratio is less than or equal to the previous ratio. In that particular case, we want the color to be down. The line down here that is commented out is the same exact code that we have here. It's just a much more compact version. And if you're not familiar with coding, it's a little harder to read. But the basic way that this works, it says the change color, if that value is true, in other words, if the user requested to change the color and the ratio is greater than the previous ratio, we want it to be color up. If the ratio is less than the previous ratio, we want it to be down. And if the user did not request to change the color based on the direction, the default is blue. The last thing we're going to do is update the ratio. So we're going to say the color now equals line color, this value that we determined up here. And the last thing we do before we leave this line is to set the previous ratio. So the previous ratio is now equal to the current value that we just calculated. So when we come in, we can make the comparison of the current bar to the previous bar. We're going to save that. And now when you go to the chart and we pull up the settings, you'll see we can now change the color based on direction. So if we go in here, we change these colors, you'll see that the line colors change accordingly. We're getting closer. That's step number 3 of the indicator. We're going to do 2 basic things. We're going to clean up the settings dialog so it's a little easier to read. And we're also going to change this line indicator so it only shows up on the daily, weekly, or the monthly. And let me show you why that is. If we click on a 5-minute chart, you'll see how skewed the data is when we have the RS line indicator shown. I'm going to show you how to handle that. So let's go into the Python editor. I'm going to delete the code from before, paste in our new version, and again, starting at the top, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this section of code right here. So the lines existed from before, so the change color, color up and color down, but we're adding an additional parameter here on the end called inline. And what this means is all 3 of these parameters are going to be inline, on the same line inside of settings. So if I say inline, I just give it a string that makes sense to me. So in this case, I used inline once, or just a capital I1. And if I do the same down here for the second line and the same in the third line, all 3 of those will be inline. And I'll show you what that means in just a minute. The other change that we have is down here on the bottom. And you'll say when we plot it, this time we're adding a call to say, is the current time frame daily, weekly, or monthly? The question mark means if it is daily, weekly, or monthly, then show the ratio times the offset. If it's not daily, weekly, or monthly, don't plot the line, so NA, so it's not applicable. And that's the only change. So once I save this and I minimize it and I go into our settings, here's how the inline change looks. So now all 3 of these parameters are on the same line instead of them being one on top of the other. And if we go into a daily chart, an intraday chart, you'll see the RS line is not shown. There we go, 1 step closer. There, just one more version of the indicator to go. And at this time, what we're going to add is support for the green dot that we showed, indicating a new high. So I'm going to go back to the Python editor, delete the previous code, paste in the current version, start up here at the top, and the first thing we're going to add is one more settings value. This one is called new high look back count. So this is how many bars back we want to look to see if we're at a new high. We're going to default that to 50. The minimum we're going to look back is at least 10, and the maximum we're going to look back is 200. Here on line 19, we're creating an array, and this is an array of floating point values that represent each of the ratios for all the bars in the past. So every time we calculate a new ratio, we're going to save it in this array. And now we're going to scroll down to line 47, and this is the code we use to determine if we show the green dot or not. So we're going to say if we're on the last bar, so if the bar state is last, we're going to default the new high to true. And now we're going to loop through the look back count that we specified before. Remember the default value is 50. We're going to say for all 50 of those values, we're going to go into the array that we created. We're going to get the current value and compare it to the ratio. And if at any point we find a value inside of that array that is higher than the current bar, then we know that we don't have a new high. So we're going to say the new high is false. We're going to break out of this loop because we don't need to continue any further because we know we do not have a new high. And then the last thing that we do is we're going to say if we have a new high, we're going to create a label. And that label is going to be shown at the current bar index, which is the last bar. The Y location is going to be the ratio times the offset, so the same place as where the bar ended. We're going to create a color. It's going to be green. We're going to give it some transparency so it's not solid. We're going to give it 50%. The style is a circle, and we're going to make its size tiny. And the last line of code that we need to add is right here in the bottom. So at the end of every bar, we need to save the previous ratio, which we had from before, and then we need to add that ratio into the array of all the previous bars so we can look for a new high. Once we save that and we minimize, you'll see right here, here's that green dot that shows up. So if we go in and we were to change this, for example, to 100, we're looking back 100 bars now from this point. So from here back 100 bars, we'll see we're no longer at a new high, so the green dot is not visible. And that's it. At this point, we've got a fully functional RS line indicator. I'll go ahead and post the code online, and I hope you found this video helpful.